Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel,
And I'm Shann.
and we're the co-hosts of the Overthinkers podcast. If you don't know me, I am the head of strategy out of RGA's New York office, and I've run digital and innovation projects for the last 10 or 12 years.
And I am the head of strategy at Zenith, media agency based in New York as well. We normally record things together, but as you can see, we have a bit of a Zoom moment because of the situation.
Yeah, and we are a little isolated, but trying to find a way to come together.
And we figured, because of everyone being isolated and workloads being what they are, and we hope your workload is hard, because we know some people out there right now, it's not necessarily easy. But we both, being strategists, very often experience the Swiss Army knife nature of the strategist doing a lot of things. And we want to talk a little bit about how we feel about this and how things have gotten during this COVID situation.
Yeah, I think this is a challenge that I've felt, especially for our strategists, for a long time, because you are required to do so many things. You're required to be counsel for the clients. You're required to be a partner to the creatives. You're constantly in a creation mode in terms of creating decks or deliverables. And then equally, you're expected to have a sort of expert finger on the pulse of culture. And this is especially accelerated during this time where I think we're having to make more and more high-level elevated decisions and turn them around quickly for clients. And it's been extra relentless in that it hasn't come up. And then, I think we also get a little bit more exhausted than most too, because, and I think, creative is equally burdened with this, but it tends to be throwing ideas at the wall just to have many hit the cutting room floor, because there are limits to what we can and can't do during this time. So I think there is more pressure before that I've seen, at least on me and my teams. What about you, Shann?
Well, the thing in media is generally the business lead is often the strategy lead, which is something that annoys me quite a bit, because I think that it's kind of hard to make them happen both at the same time. It's got a difficult tension to reconcile sometimes. And so it's just expanding this reality, and it's complicated because we're asked to kind of come up with, what's happening with COVID, whilst also delivering the business at the same time. And I see the teams, especially the teams I work with, it's very hard, and the pressure is huge because you have so many things you need to be able to do and understand, and on top of that, scale yourself to doing the day-to-day management of the clients. So as you can imagine, it makes the job very complicated. And I know that the way I've always tried to kind of deal with that level of stress and tension with all the things we can do, because ultimately I know that, I've come to peace with the fact that my job is very often to be this Swiss Army knife now within the organization. But I try to find the things that really interest me, or at least to disconnect a little bit what feeds me from what I produce. Because there's very often things we need to do for work are not always the things that I want to be getting up in the morning and think about. It's not so that I hate it, but it's just that it's not always the ones that are the most stimulating. And so having things to do on the side and claiming that time, and I know it's complicated because you have deadlines and things to do and whatnot, but the ability of saying, no, we cannot do this, or we don't have the capacity to do this, for me is not just something I try to do to not work until 11, it's also to try to find the flexibility to find time for me to feed myself, whether it's reading something, whether it's writing something, whether it's recording something with Rachel. And so that aspect of understanding what makes you tick and not giving up on it, I think is a big starting point.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, my husband makes fun of me all the time because he's like, are you never able to turn off? And I think it's very frustrating to be, watching YouTube and the pre-roll ads come on, and I see that Chase Bank has now shifted their production models so that you can tell that they're focusing on illustration, or they're highlighting their digital banking features. Just as an example, even when I try to disconnect, it becomes really difficult to truly stay disconnected at the end of the day. And something that I'm worried about for my teams, I apologize if I was looking down earlier, I was looking, there's a specific stress model that's called, I want to say the Jan Tierney model, which basically talks about how when you have stress in the short term, it does help because you perform better for that period of time and your body responds well to it. But what I'm worried about, not just for myself, but equally with teams, is like, how can you sustain that stress? So as we're starting to close out on 7 or 8 weeks of us being isolated, us, doing these fast turnarounds, how can I make sure that they have the space to rejuvenate and allow those stress levels to reduce, which can be especially hard in this climate when you see, jobless claims going up more and more. I think almost every single holding company has gone through layoffs. And then, of course, the demand to deliver is still there. So I can only encourage them to play, as much Animal Crossing as I can, or to relax in whatever rewards them best, if that makes sense.
What's your experience with relaxation? Because for me, it's made a bit of a difference, because the problem is technically our brains cannot switch off easily. And for me, I've noticed that it's very helpful last thing before going to bed or first thing in the morning to do a 10 minutes or 15 minutes headspace. And I'm trying to be a bit better at it, because it allows my brain activity to not just switch off, but to rewire, I would say. Like, there's just things where I notice my body is much more tensed, even to the way I think, and my thoughts are much more cross-wired before than after I do this. Have you played a little bit with this yourself?
I mean, there's things that I do. So I have a daily morning exercise routine. I tend to go through, like, I'm pretty leisurely in the morning from like 6 to 8 a.m. I'll tootle around. I make breakfast. I have a fun time making breakfast for myself. In the evening, I care a lot about my skincare routine. But I think my challenge is more that, the 2 hours between 6 and 8 a.m. and then immediately shutting my computer at like 7:30 or 8 doesn't leave a lot of time, because I tend to go to bed pretty early. So it's more, for me, it's more important to just be able to actually take a full weekend more than anything else. I notice that if I work a couple of weekends in a row, or if I work too many late nights, that then I become much more useless. I think one of the things I've admired a lot that one of my colleagues said, especially because we're in this leadership position, is that we need to start treating ourselves like athletes. Like, there are very few people who do the jobs that we do. We're highly specialized. We've been trained in this craft over many years. But if you're not treating your body right or your mind right, that you're only setting yourself up to like injure yourself as a player, which is something that I've been very much trying to take to heart.
Interesting. The athlete angle, yeah, I've not heard that before. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, for me, for sure, like, being able to stay fit, both mentally and physically, just makes a massive, massive difference. I mean, the other thing that I've really embraced over the last 2 years in my career has been, and as I said when I started, things that kind of get me going, and I take multiple breaks during the day just to make sure that I switch my brain to things that also excite me a little bit. And so, for some, it's something deep. For me, it's Twitter, for instance, or spending a little bit of time reading some pieces and whatnot. What do you enjoy doing do you even take any time, Rachel, during your day? Because I know people like, I mean, I know you're a workaholic, let's be honest. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
My wife is a workaholic too. She works in an ad agency as well. And there's a reality, like, her and I work very differently. Like, she's more like, she's going to bang through the day and no break. And she comes home, she's not read a single thing, versus I'm going to come home, it's like, I've read this and this and this, and I've, insulted this person over here. and so, like, I tend to take those mini breaks throughout my day, and I've noticed that they help me. Sometimes it might hurt productivity in the short term, but they really help me build the kind of productivity I want in the long term. And I'm kind of curious for you, as a pretty hardcore workaholic, how you try to do that.
I honestly haven't had that in a long time, or at least since we've been here. So I'll be like super transparent. The first thing that I asked for when I got a promotion wasn't a raise. I was like, I need somebody who can help me defend my calendar. Because what was happening every day is I would just have meetings triple booked until 7:00 at night, and it becomes very hard to be the sole defender of your time. So I've been very lucky in the past 5 or 6 months and in previous roles to have an assistant who can manage my calendar and who can sort of start to do that on my behalf. She does do a really good job of setting up time blocks for me, which, during those times are when I'll, start to read articles. I'm a big fan of newsletters and those sorts of things. But to me, what can be really hard about reading about anything in the business, even if it's interesting, is that it almost always ties back to work, which is the really difficult thing. So if I'm reading about how this is affecting the psychology of consumers, or if I'm reading about the financial markets, or if I'm reading about even like how consumption behaviors have changed, all of those things are things that greatly but unfortunately all connect back to work. So for me, the only time I really truly feel I can be disconnected from work is when I exist in things that are not based in reality. So that's why I tend to be very like science fiction or fantasy or comic book heavy in my consumptions, because those are the only ways that you can start to disconnect things from the applicable work that we do. Because again, you and I both work across a wide array of industries. And so when you have to be thinking about what does this mean for a bank, for a social network, for a telecom company, for an alcohol brand, becomes very difficult to turn it off at any point in time, if that makes sense.
It's true. It's funny because I never thought about it this way. I do have the same kind of leanings towards science fiction, and I real stuff doesn't necessarily excite me as much when I try to think of entertainment. However, I do love, when I'm on holidays, I do read about marketing, for instance. I rarely take a novel with me, or I'll take my Switch if I want to kind of play some games, but I end up usually not doing too much because I have more of a mental bandwidth to read the deeper aspects of some of the things that feed me as a marketeer, which I know sounds pretty pathetic. But generally speaking, I think I was listening to Dave's talk on the Isolated Talks, Dave Trott, sorry. And he was talking about the fact, creatives are inherently extremely curious people. Because you don't always know when it's going to be useful, but it's going to be useful one day. And I think the strategists are very much the same there. I think, I got some fire a few months ago for tweeting the fact that for me as a strategist, if you can't really speak to who's inspired you or things that have changed your mind over the last 12 months, you're not doing your job properly, because I feel like, you have to have that sense of curiosity and want to kind of find out what others are thinking, even if you don't necessarily agree with what they're saying. And so I think like that level of curiosity, I've tried to find ways to make that part of the enjoyment. Now, I agree with you, it doesn't make it easy to disconnect, which is where my meditation / relaxation sometimes helps a little bit. But at least I've been able to transform that into a way that becomes pleasurable. And my way of doing it and making pleasurable is I don't just read. I get engaged in the debate, and I write, and maybe I take my white male privilege and kind of move it forward. And so that's kind of the way we try to do it.
We do need more opinions out there on the internet, Shann.
There's not enough.
There's no shortage. There's no shortage at all. Yeah, I think we had things like an art class that we were taking. There are ways to start to turn off. Again, my habits tend to be very consumptive overall. So, and it's hard because I have that same, originally I started out as a designer. So I've always played a curious or curatorial role, but I think the hard thing is that like everything becomes a reference again, whether it's a piece of art or a piece of design or an ad, like everything becomes something that you'll end up handing to a creative to say, think about a YouTube series like this, and here's 3 examples of YouTube series or something like that.
But aren't you proud of this when you come up with it?
I'm a little worried at how encyclopedic my knowledge of the internet is getting to be, but I do worry sometimes, of course, overall.
Well, we hope we managed to maybe change your mind a little bit, maybe not, but we actually incentivize you guys to look for things out there. So Rachel, thanks very much.
No, thank you, Shann, as always.
And if you guys want to find us, we're on the Overthinkers podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud. You can find us there. Otherwise, you'll find us on Twitter. I tend to be very argumentative on Twitter. Racialist, so I'd say a bit more gentle. But she's getting there.
I'm trying to have stronger opinions firmly held.
a better opinion than mine usually. So that's the good news.
False.
All right. Well, thanks you guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.